Welcome to Women That Kill. We use murder cases to help people better understand history because behind every crime, there is a world, and understanding that world changes how we see everything. Today's case is one of the most heartbreaking we have ever covered on this show, not because the victim didn't matter, he did, and we will give him his due, but because the road that led a young woman from a macaroni factory in Shreveport, Louisiana, to an electric chair in 1942 is a road paved almost entirely by poverty, abuse, desperation, and a love so consuming it made her incapable of rational thought. Her name was Toni Jo Henry. She was 26 years old when they put her in that chair. She wore a black dress and black pumps. She smiled at the reporters on the way in, and when they asked her if she had any final words, she said simply, "No." This case helps us understand what the Great Depression meant for women not in the language of economics or statistics, but in the most human and intimate terms possible. What it meant to be poor, female, and completely without a safety net in 1930s America. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe and like this video. It helps more people find the show. She was not born Toni Jo Henry. She was born Annie Beatrice McQuiston on January 3, 1916 in Shreveport, Louisiana, the third of 5 children. Her early life was defined by loss before she was old enough to understand what loss meant. Her mother contracted tuberculosis, a severe and highly infectious disease that attacks the lungs, spreading through the air with every cough and sneeze. While her mother fought to survive, young Annie was sent to live with her grandmother. She was 6 years old when her mother died. After her mother's death, Annie returned to live with her father and a new stepmother. It was not a warm homecoming. The family struggled financially, and the relationship between Annie and her father was strained. What tenderness there might have been evaporated quickly under the pressures of what was coming, because the Great Depression was about to arrive, and it was going to change everything. To truly understand Toni Jo Henry, you have to understand what the Great Depression did to ordinary Americans, and what it did specifically to women and girls with no resources and no safety net. The Great Depression, which began with the stock market crash of 1929, was the most severe economic catastrophe in American history. Between 50 and 60% of the total American population fell into poverty. Banks collapsed. Businesses shuttered. Unemployment reached catastrophic levels. And here is the critical thing that many people don't fully appreciate when they think about this period. There was no welfare. There was no social security. There was no unemployment insurance. None of the safety net programs that Americans today take for granted existed yet. If you fell into poverty during the Great Depression, there was almost nothing institutional waiting to catch you. Louisiana was hit particularly hard. The state's economy depended on cotton, sugar, oil, and timber, and the value of all of them collapsed almost simultaneously. The major ports in New Orleans, which had been engines of economic activity, ground to a halt as foreign trade dried up. Communities that had been struggling before the crash found themselves in freefall. For women and girls in this environment, the options were devastatingly limited. You could depend on a man, a father, a husband, a brother, and hope he had enough. Or, if that wasn't available, you could find another way. Annie McQuiston had no one to depend on, and she was 13 years old. She had managed to find a part-time job at a macaroni factory. one of the few options available to a teenager with no education and no connections. Then the factory manager found out that tuberculosis had been in her family. He fired her on the spot, the specter of contagion more important to him than the reality of a child who needed to eat. When Annie came home and told her father she had lost her job, he beat her. She ran away. She was 13 years old, and she had nowhere to go. What happened next was not a choice in any meaningful sense of the word. It was survival. On the streets of Shreveport with no money, no home, no family willing or able to take her in, Annie McQuiston did what millions of women throughout history have done when every other door was closed. She survived the only way available to her. She changed her name to Toni Jo Hood. She became a prostitute. In the 1930s, prostitution in cities like Shreveport operated within a loosely structured system. Women working independently, or through what were called ringer houses, establishments that were part of larger chains, were required to be tested for disease and obtain a health certificate before working. It was dangerous, degrading, and inescapable for women who had no other options. And it was remarkably common during the Depression years, when poverty had stripped so many women of every other possibility. Toni worked in a brothel in Shreveport's red light district. She became addicted to drugs and alcohol, the kind of numbing that makes an unbearable life bearable, at least temporarily. And eventually, desperate for something better, she chose what many people in impossible situations do. She left, to start over, to try again somewhere else. She moved to Texas. In 1939, in Austin, Texas, Toni Jo Hood met a man named Claude Henry. Everyone called him Cowboy. He was a boxer. He was charming. He was also out on bail, awaiting a second trial for the murder of a man named Arthur Sinclair, which he claimed had been self-defense. None of that seemed to matter to Toni. Or perhaps it mattered in a different way than it should have. Perhaps a man who had lived on the edge of violence felt familiar, felt like home, in a world where violence had always been part of the landscape. They fell in love quickly and completely. On November 25th, 1939, they married. They spent their honeymoon in California. By all accounts, it was the happiest period of Toni Jo's life. Then they came home, and Claude's second trial began. Cowboy believed he would be acquitted. He had claimed self-defense. He was confident the jury would see it his way. In January 1940, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to 50 years in the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville. Toni Jo Henry sat in that courtroom and watched the person who had given her life its first real warmth be taken away for 50 years. At the sentencing hearing, she made a vow. She was going to get him out. What followed is one of the most desperately misguided series of decisions in the annals of American crime. Not because Toni Jo was stupid, but because she was a woman so consumed by grief and determination that she had lost all contact with what was actually possible. Cowboy was in Huntsville, one of the largest, most secure, and best-run maximum security prisons in the country. Getting him out was not a realistic proposition. Every criminal friend Toni consulted told her so directly. She didn't listen. She found a partner in Harold Burks, an ex-convict who was also AWOL from the U.S. Army, and who claimed he knew Huntsville from the inside and could help her get Cowboy out. Burks had his own agenda. He wanted to rob a bank he knew, in a small town in Arkansas, over 300 miles away. The plan, such as it was, went like this. First, steal a car. Second, drive to Arkansas and rob the bank. Third, use the money to somehow get Cowboy out of prison. The third step had no actual mechanism. Nobody had figured out how the money was going to accomplish the impossible task of extracting a man from a maximum security penitentiary. But Tony was beyond caring about logic. She had a vow to keep. Armed with stolen pistols and posing as a couple, Tony and Burks began hitchhiking towards their destination. On the road near Orange, Texas, a man named Joseph P. Calloway stopped to give two hitchhikers a ride. Calloway was doing a favor for a friend, driving a new Ford V8 coupe to Louisiana for delivery. He saw Tony and Burks on the roadside and offered them a lift. It was the kind of ordinary human kindness that people extend every day without a second thought. At some point during the drive, Tony pulled out her revolver. She ordered Calloway off the main highway and onto an isolated road near Lake Charles, Louisiana. She told him to get out of the car. She told him to take off his clothes. She wanted them for Cowboy to change into after the prison break. She took the $15 he had in his pocket. She ordered him into the trunk. They drove until they found a remote spot. She told Calloway to get out of the trunk. She walked him across a field to some haystacks. She told him to get on his knees and say his prayers. Then she shot him in the back of the head. Burks, who had gone along with the hitchhiking and the car theft and the robbery, was completely unprepared for what he had just witnessed. While Tony slept that night at a cheap hotel in Camden, Arkansas, he took the car and disappeared. Back in Shreveport, Tony stayed with her aunt. But something about her, the haunted quality of a woman carrying what she was carrying, alarmed her aunt enough that the older woman went to the local police and asked for help. Sergeant Dave Walker went to speak with Tony. He asked her some questions, and without any prompting beyond his presence, Tony Jo Henry gave a full confession. She told him everything. She even handed over the gun. Walker didn't believe her. No murder had been reported. Nobody had been found. No missing persons report matched her description. He arrested her anyway, more out of caution than conviction. When Tony was transferred to Lake Charles Police and taken out to find the body she claimed to have left in a field, she led them directly to it, precisely where she had said it would be, precisely as she had left it, kneeling in the field, as if still saying his prayers. If she had not led them there, Joseph Calloway might have gone undiscovered for months, perhaps years. The bullet recovered at autopsy matched the bullets in Tony's gun. The stolen Ford was found in Arkansas, still containing Calloway's clothing. Tony was formally charged with murder. She initially refused to name her accomplice, trying to protect Burks. Eventually, she gave him up, and he was arrested. During questioning, Burks told investigators exactly what she had told them, and added that he had never planned to kill anyone, never planned to rob a bank, never intended to help break anyone out of prison. He had just wanted a ride to Arkansas. He had not counted on the woman beside him being capable of what she was capable of. Tony Jo Henry's trial began on March 27, 1940, in Lake Charles. It attracted enormous press coverage. Journalists, fascinated by the combination of beauty, violence, and doomed love, described her in the breathless language of the era as a sultry tigress. Her defense tried to place the blame for Calloway's murder on Burks. The jury didn't believe it. 2 days after the trial began, Tony Jo Henry was found guilty of murder. Under Louisiana law at the time, that verdict carried a mandatory death sentence. She showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Over the next 2 years, her attorneys pursued every legal avenue available. She won 2 appeals. She was granted 2 additional trials. Each time, the jury found her guilty. Each time, the sentence was death. Her lawyers challenged the constitutionality of Louisiana's switch from hanging to electrocution as its method of execution, arguing it constituted cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. The Supreme Court disagreed. The governor of Louisiana, Sam Jones, told the press publicly that he would not grant Toni Jo Henry a reprieve. There was nowhere left to go. While Toni's appeals wound through the courts, the world kept moving. World War II had begun, and the labor demands of the war effort reached even inside prison walls. Cowboy was transferred from Huntsville to a Texas prison farm to help with agricultural labor. The security was lighter than at the main facility. On November 23, 1942, 5 days before Toni's scheduled execution, Claude Henry escaped. He escaped to save her. He had no plan, no resources, and no realistic prospect of success. But the man she had loved completely enough to kill a stranger for had returned the gesture in the only way he had left. He ran. He was recaptured almost immediately and returned to Huntsville. The day before her execution, the prison arranged for Toni and Cowboy to speak by telephone. It was the last time they would ever talk. Throughout the call, Cowboy was in tears, emotional, desperate, broken. Toni was cheerful. She told him to serve his time, to go straight, to make something of his life, to let her go. On Saturday, November 28, 1942, at 12 minutes past noon, Toni Jo Henry was certified dead. She had walked into the execution chamber in a black dress and black pumps. She had cried when they shaved her head and had been allowed to wear a scarf to cover her baldness. When the guard finished reading the death warrant and asked if she had a final statement, she said, "I think not," and walked calmly toward the chamber, smiling at the reporters who had gathered to witness her end. She was allowed a few moments of prayer. Asked again for last words, she said nothing. 2,000 volts. 12 minutes past noon. 26 years old. Her last request was that a crucifix be placed in her hand when she was buried. She is buried at Orange Grove Cemetery in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Before she died, Toni had tried to take full responsibility for the murder in an attempt to save Harold Burks. It did not work. On March 23, 1943, less than 4 months after Toni's execution, Burks died in the same electric chair. The state of Texas released Cowboy from prison in 1944. On July 15, 1945, less than a year after his release, Claude Henry was shot and killed in a bar brawl. The love story that had started everything was over. It had been over, really, since the night a man named Joseph Calloway stopped to offer 2 strangers a ride. At the end of every episode, if I can find the killer's birthday, I take a look at their zodiac sign, because it gives us an interesting lens through which to view who they were. Toni Jo Henry was born on January 3, 1916. That makes her a Capricorn. Capricorns are known for their fierce determination, their loyalty, and their willingness to work toward a goal with a persistence that borders on obsession. They are not people who give up. They are not easily dissuaded when a Capricorn commits to something. A person, a cause, a vow, they commit completely, and they do not let go easily. And when you look at Toni Jo through that lens, something deeply human comes into focus. She made a vow in a courtroom that she was going to get Cowboy out of prison. Every rational voice around her told her it was impossible. She didn't care. She found a partner. She made a plan. She hitchhiked hundreds of miles. She killed a man she had never met before and had no reason to hate. All of it, every single step, was driven by one Capricorn quality taken to its most devastating extreme: loyalty. A loyalty so absolute that it left no room for reason, for mercy, or for the life of Joseph Calloway. The tragedy of Toni Jo Henry is not that she was a monster. It is that she wasn't. She was a woman shaped by poverty and loss and abuse and a desperate need to hold on to the one thing in her life that had ever felt like love. And that need destroyed her, and it destroyed an innocent man along with it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more about women who killed, check out my playlist. There are plenty more stories waiting for you. And I'll see you next time.